Hey, Dan.
No, I'm not on mute. Stephen, was that you?
Oh, hi, could you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I am trying to get this going. This is my first time. Hold on just 1 minute.
I'll get out of your hair.
Okay.
I think I'm on. Can anyone hear me?
Hey, I can hear you, David.
Okay, good. I hear a dog.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
My mother's arriving. All right. Oh, she's getting her glasses. Dan, you look like you're in the Twilight Zone there.
Well, I've been in the Twilight Zone here for the last 5 weeks. When you're my age and they tell you to stay in,
That's true.
The last time I remember anybody saying that to me, I was 3 years old. So it occurs when you're 3 years old, and it occurs when you're 80 years old. Apparently.
That's true.
And so I've been homebound, as they say. Sneak out every once in a while, but not often.
I'm getting my 95-year-old mother to get in here also.
Ah, is she with you when wandering?
Oh, yeah. I live with her. Oh, look at this from Stephen.
oh, can you see the presentation?
Yeah, I see Gunn Museum is
Okay.
Calhoun Street.
We're making progress. Okay. Is it filling your full screen?
Better.
Oh, yeah, nice.
Okay.
My mother's getting her glasses.
Oh, okay, great.
There are 15 participants.
Oh, wonderful. I love that. Thank you all for joining us. I thought I had set it so I would mute you all upon entry, but I guess that didn't happen, which is okay if you don't make any noise. No background noise.
We can definitely do that.
Okay, whoops. Okay, so it seems to be working. You could all see that PowerPoint that I'm going to show while I'm talking.
Okay.
Okay, let's see here. Hide thumbnail, show small.
I'll have to tell my low-tech mother to not say anything during the presentation.
That's okay. I could show you what I look like. How are you doing? I hope that everyone is well and safe. I'm Stephen Bartkus, the curator at the Gunn Historical Museum, and I'm broadcasting to you from my home today. And you know, during this difficult time during the pandemic, we were thinking how we could continue to do some museum programming. So we signed up for a Zoom account, and we're going to try some virtual programming. This is our first program that we're trying today. So thank you for your patience. And as some of you may know, that we do these readings from the archives down at the Washington Senior Center. And we've been doing them for about 13 years now. And the museum and the library are very fortunate to have a wonderful collection of town history papers that were written by residents in the early 1900s. And what I usually do is pull an interesting paper, go down to the Senior Center to read it, and I share photographs that are related to that paper. and then we have a brief discussion after with the audience. So we're going to try to follow the same format here. Obviously, we're not in person, but I put this PowerPoint together, and I'm going to start reading the paper in a moment. And after that, we could have a brief discussion. Maybe there are places that you recognize or names that you recognize that I'm reading. And you might have questions that I might be able to answer, or maybe some of the other people who are joining us today might be able to answer. And like I said, I'm new to Zoom, but I think once we get to the discussion in about 45 minutes or so, I think we usually have people raise their hand. So if someone's raising their hand, then I'll be able to call on you. Hopefully that'll work okay. And I don't hear anyone else joining us at this moment, so I think I'm going to get started. If you're all good with that, is everyone good to start?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so the paper we're reading today was written by Mrs. Edwin Whitehead, and it's called A History of Calhoun Street, and it was read at a meeting of the Women's Club of Washington on May 2nd in 1938. And if at any point you can't hear me while I'm reading this, let me know, but I'm trying to project. It starts off by saying that Calhouns of Washington trace their lineage to the Calhouns of Scotland. The original name of Calhoun is still retained in Scotland. The ancestor of the surname of Calhoun was Humphrey Kilpatrick, whose favor the Earl of Lennox granted a charter of the lands of Colquhoun in the reign of Alexander II about the year 1200. The first who assumed the name Colquhoun was Ingram, the successor of the above-named Kilpatrick. 3 or 4 generations after, in the year 1374, Humphrey Colquhoun married the daughter of Godfrey, Laird of Luss. The modern descendant is Sir James Colquhoun of Roasterhue. The following paper was written by Mrs. Helen Fenn Whitehead, who was born in the house now occupied by Mrs. Alice Keator, an original Calhoun house. Entering Calhoun Street School District, which lies northward from Washington Depot, cross the railroad track with the supply company's store at the right, ascend the hill by the supply company's house where George Wells lives, past the small cottage on the left built by Mr. Poppenseek, and where he manufactured cigars, one comes to Miss Measles's house, where the road turns off to the left in a westerly direction to go to North Church Hill. A little further north, the colonial house of Mr. Charles Morgan. Across the road from Miss Measles and Mr. Morgan's, in a grove of trees, stands the building where the last of the Calhoun Street schools stood, with 2 departments, primary and intermediate. Teachers came from away to teach, and some became wives and mothers here in Washington, as Mrs. L. Nathan Mitchell, Mrs. Howard Farrand, Mrs. Willis Nettleton, and others. On a rise of ground directly across from Mr. Morgan's stood several years the previous school building. It was built in Gothic style, much embellished, with carved decorations and on the outside and a highly arched ceiling inside. At this time, it was customary to have a man teacher in the winter and a lady for the summer, as the big boys, almost men grown, attended school in winter when the school year was divided into terms. Northward from Mr. Morgan's, just beyond the fork of the roads, is the home of William B. Hickox. And a little further north, a large old-fashioned house formerly occupied by Mr. Hickox, previously by his father and grandfather, now owned by Russell Jones. John Andrus's house comes next, and then Miss Alice Keator's. Then Gregory S. Bryan's old home, now owned by the Ives family. This road from John Andrus's past Miss Keator's and Ives runs nearly east to west. Northward from Miss Keator's, a road runs up passing Postmaster Walfrid Carlson's and Merrill Clark's. This is the heart of Calhoun Street. To this section in 1832 came David Calhoun, and he bought a large tract of land. David was born in Scotland in 1690. His family emigrated to Londonderry, Ireland on account of religious persecution, but persecution followed them there. He, with two brothers, James and John, came to America and settled in Stratford, Connecticut in 1714, where David married Mrs. Catherine Coe Fairchild. His brother, James, later went to Maryland. His brother, John, settled in South Carolina, and John's grandson was John C. Calhoun, who was known politically. David bought a tract of land enough to make a square mile from the Indians for a cow and a half. His southern boundary was the east-west road, which now goes past Miss Keator's and Mrs. Ives's. Soon after this, about 1742, Richard Bryan, ancestor of Gregory Bryan, bought land south of this road. Only there were no roads at that time. South of the western part of David's farm, from the Indians, he purchased the south of the western part of David's farm from the Indians for 2 woolen blankets, 1 gallon of Dutch rum, and 2 quarts of molasses. The Bryan land extended south nearly to the river where the Mason and Davis feed store is. Hickox owned south of the eastern part of Calhoun's land. The Chappaqua River was Calhoun's eastern boundary for 3/4 of a mile or more. Where the river turns west, it becomes his south boundary until Bee Brook flows into it. His south line is due west from there till it reaches the home of John Andrus, and the present road past Mrs. Ives is the southern boundary. It is probable the Indians continued to hunt and fish on this property, as an Indian village is spoken of as being west of the Calhoun houses. And long years after, the hollowed stone could be seen where the Indian women ground their corn with a long stone, which had a rounded end to fit in this hollow. Mr. Calhoun told Mr. Fenn how the Indians captured wild animals. In between Bee Brook and Chapel Brook, which you can see on this map here on the right-hand side, is a V-shaped tract of land formerly covered with scrub 3/4 of a mile long and about 3/4 of a mile wide at the top, tapering to a few rods at the river where there is a steep bank. After the leaves fell, the Indians built a fence in the river there of brush and treetops, light but strong. The next move is to go to the north side of the V and set fire to the dry leaves from stream to stream. Each stream to have a band of Indians to go just ahead of the fire, shouting and yelling. This was sure to run the wild animals to the pen at the river, where the Indians could easily kill them. In those days, fish were plentiful in the brooks and river. In the woods were partridge, quail, wild turkey, and deer for the hunter, to help out the bill of fare, but it is to be hoped that David Calhoun had other cows besides the one he bartered with the Indians, as he brought with him, besides his wife, several small children who needed milk. And in the following years, their number was increased until 1744, when his last son was born. He had 6 sons and 2 daughters. History does not record whether David's first residence was a log house or whether there were sawmills near enough to have boards sawed to cover a frame hewn from logs cut on his own land. Probably the first one was primitive, as he must have had a strenuous life to build a home, clear land, plant, and raise food for his family and his stock. Its location is definitely not known. One of the oldest houses stood about halfway between Miss Keator's and John Andrus's on the north side of the road that you see in this picture here. Sugar pear trees were standing there, which had been in the dooryard as late as 1860. Not far from this house had been a blacksmith shop. Mr. Fenn picked up nails there that had been made in the blacksmith shop. When there were children enough to form a school, a building was put up on the corner opposite Miss Keator's. Joseph Calhoun, the eldest, had the farm now owned by John Andrus. The deed from him or his estate to young Elliot is dated 1821, though one of the accounts speaks of his death about 1810 at 80 or 85 years old. There were two houses, also barns, deeded to young's Elliot. The small old house with only 3 rooms stood several rods northeast of John Andrus's house. This Joseph may have built it, or it may have been the house of David. Joseph had 3 children, Isaac, who died about 22 years old, Joseph Jr., who moved to Woodbury, and Rachel, who moved to Stockbridge, Massachusetts. David's son David moved to Greens County, New York, where he left numerous family. Ebenezer moved to Litchfield, Herkimer County, New York. He had 2 sons and 2 daughters. One son, Chauncey, settled at Watertown, New York. The others still live at Litchfield, New York. George, born in 1744, married widow Judith Taylor, daughter of Deacon Abel Comstock of Warren, Connecticut. In 1806, he moved his family to Salisbury, Connecticut, where they lived until 1812, when he and his daughter Julia Ann both died of the same disease. John Taylor, George's eldest son, moved to Rochester, New York in 1825. The mother died in Salisbury, and Polly went to Canfield, Ohio, where she lived until July 2nd, 1838, when she passed away at 53 years old. George's son, George Albion Calhoun, was born in Washington on October 11th, 1788. He worked on the farm here, as you see in this photograph, and at 18 years of age was known as a man of business, but he was not satisfied, so he began to educate himself. At 21, he was free to go to school. In 1812, he entered Williams College. He graduated from Andover. In 1817, he graduated from Andover Theological Seminary. And in 1852, he received the degree of Doctor of Divinity from Hamilton. He was pastor of the Second Congregational Church in Coventry, Connecticut for many years. He was a member of the Corporation of Yale College for 11 years and trustee of the Theological Institute, now the Hartford Theological Seminary, for 30 years. He married Betsy Scoville, whose mother was a church. Her grandfather was a lieutenant in the Wyoming, Pennsylvania massacre of July 3rd, 1778, a descendant of Richard Warren, who came over on the Mayflower. George Albion Calhoun had 2 children, one George Whitfield and the other David Samuel, the latter born on September 11th, 1827 in Coventry. He graduated from Yale in 1848, and he became one of the most distinguished jurors of the state. Judge David Calhoun died in Hartford in 1912. Back to the original David Calhoun, his daughter Mary was born on December 29th, 1732. Soon after, they came to Calhoun Street and married Alexander Hama of Bethlehem on October of 1763 and died on May 5th, 1798. Her gravestone beside her husband's is in good repair. It has this epitaph on it: "Behold and see as you pass by. As you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so must you be. Prepare for death and follow me." James lived and died in Washington at about 75 years old. He married Mary Guthrie, daughter of a well-to-do farmer of Woodbury. His house was across the road from the one recently occupied by Mrs. Abel Calhoun. Then his son Reuben was born on August 7th, 1766, and lived there with his wife, Mrs. Hannah Beers Gibson, and had two sons, Burr and Abel, who married Susan and Elizabeth Judson. They lived in the new house, this one that you see here, on the east side of the road. Abel's daughter Mary only lived 11 years. Burr's son George died in New Milford in 1931 at age 77. James's son, James Jr., had three sons. One, Harmon, lived in the house that you see here, built by his father, where H. Shearer resides. He married Philomena Hopkins. His daughter, Sarah, twice married. Her second husband was Charles Hubble of Watertown, Connecticut. Harmon's son, Henry Calhoun, whose grave that you see here, died in the Civil War. David, son of James, was born in 1811. I do not know whether he was David Calhoun who lived on Christian Street. I have left Dr. John Calhoun till the last, as he was an important person, much respected and of extensive practice. He had 6 sons and 1 daughter. When Mr. Bacon, who kept the Hollow store in Woodbury, put an exorbitant price on salt, a committee of inspection was appointed. Dr. Calhoun, Increase Mosley, and Jonathan Farrand consisted of this committee, and the man from Calhoun Street on horseback started for Woodbury. A neighbor, on inquiring, found out his destination and the object of his visit, namely to reduce the price of salt. Joined, and others along the road turned in, and they made a good-sized company before the time they arrived at Bacon's store. They took possession of his store that you see here, put on the salt a reasonable price with fair profit to the owner, and gave out notice for the reduction in price of salt. The first man on horseback was probably Dr. John Calhoun. He died at about 52 years old and lies in the old cemetery. You could see his gravestone here. His headstone bears the inscription, quote, "Here lies one who served his generation to universal satisfaction." This is in the Judea Cemetery. One of his sons was Deacon Jediah of Cornwall. Another, Joseph, died in Cornwall at age 26. Philo moved to Danbury. Calvin lived and died on Calhoun Street in a fine house on the corner northwest of Miss Keator's. It was a 2-story house in front, running down to a lean-to on the back. At the front was a hatchway cellar door, 18 inches wide. No cider barrel ever went in through that door. They always carried it in the back door and down the cellar stairs empty, then filled through a hole in the kitchen floor with a pipe connecting with the barrel in the cellar. The doors of the barn and all outbuildings had hinges made by hand of heavy oak timber. Uncle Calvin pointed out the place where the tree stood in which a panther was shot. He also told of an Indian boy who came to his garden with a bow and arrow. Uncle Calvin asked if he could hit anything. The boy pointed to a chicken on the fence and told him, with his permission, he would take just 1 feather off of it, and he did. Uncle Calvin told of passing Platt Bryan's place. Mrs. Bryan came out with a beehive and a turkey's wing and wanted him to brush a swarm of bees from the body of a tree, which he did. A small cluster of bees containing the queen fell outside of the hive at the feet of the old lady. The queen proceeded to crawl up, and she hid inside of Mrs. Bryan's dress skirt, and the swarm of bees followed. Mrs. Bryan opened the dress at the neck, allowing those inside to go up and out, and she was not stung. Calvin had several children. Polly married John Ford. His son Simeon married Melinda Sackett. Daughter Lois married Robert Harvey and had 4 sons. Lester married Laura Averill and lives in New Paltz, New York. And Simeon Ford had 4 sons, Porter, who was a civil engineer, Lester, who was a doctor and died young in Boston, and Archie, who went west. Murray married Iva Kelly and works at dairying. Tabitha married Brimsmaid of Trumbull. Joseph Clark married Marilla Hollister and had 2 sons and 1 daughter. Sarah, Frank, and Simeon all went west. Clark married Mary Logan. Sheldon married Jane Fenn, sister of Bennett Fenn, and had 1 son who served through the Civil War. Edgar W. Calhoun, who you see pictured here, married Lucinda Munson, by whom he had 2 boys. Clarence, who died with TB, and Irwin, who had 1 daughter, and they have left Washington. Edgar married a 2nd wife, Sarah Hollister, and their 1 son, Louis, has gone to Oregon. John Calhoun, grandson of Jedediah, son of Dr. John, owns the Cathedral Pines in Cornwall, Connecticut. Mary, the daughter of Jedediah, married Charles Ford of Washington. And their 1 son, Dr. William Ford, was much loved here in town. Charles married Sarah Kinney, had 2 sons, Frederick J. and William Samuel. Dr. John had a son, Dr. John, grandfather of Clara Louise Calhoun. Daniel Calhoun, son of Dr. John, when he married Sarah Bryan, bought 17 acres of land of the Bryans, the first Calhoun to own land south of the east to west road. He built the house owned by Alice Keator that you see here in this picture. And he built first the middle part, the living room, bedroom, pantry, and a small room for a parlor. Later, on the 2 front rooms with hall and stairs. Still later, an addition at the back for a pantry and enlarging the bedroom. Their daughter, Sarah Betsy, was a cripple and walked a little with crutches, but when she came to church, she was carried in the strong arms of Deacon Samuel Frisbee, who married her sister, Esther. Daniel Bryan went to Pauling, New York. Seth married Elise Rebecca Powell, and they had children, Harriet Eunice, Sarah Judson, who was born on May 10th, 1838, and Daniel Powell, who was born on June 11th, 1840. Also, Julia Davis Pickett, who was born on September 14th, 1843. Elise Rebecca, born November 16th, 1845. Julia Davies Calhoun married Cyrus Pickett of Andover, Ohio. An old Bryan homestead of great age stood opposite the home of present Mrs. Ives. This belonged to Alexander Bryan, the grandfather of Gregory. To the north of that was a district schoolhouse and nearby a cider mill. Just east of this school was a blacksmith shop. The present H.H. Shearer Place, as you see here, is supposed to be the oldest house in Washington and was built by the grandson of the first settler, David. At the same time, Burr and Abel Calhoun families lived in the next house north. 2 Bryan brothers bought a large tract of land of the Indians south of the western part of that owned by David Calhoun. East of the Bryan tract was owned by the Hickox family until the present Mr. Russell Jones. It is understood that Richard Bryan III settled in this country about 1720. A son named Richard Bryan IV settled in Washington in 1742 and married Sarah Fowler and built a house which stood until about 40 or more years ago. This house stood on the location previously referred to opposite Mrs. Ives's. It was occupied in 1856 by Alexander and his wife Minerva Hartwell, father of Richard and grandfather of Gregory. Alexander was son of Richard IV, who married Mabel Hickox in 1770. The Hickoxes, who came later and settled southeast of Calhoun's and Bryan's, extended to the Wolf's Pit near the river, and the wolves got after their sheep at times. The Hickoxes owned a distillery. Once, a temperance speaker was engaged for a temperance lecture, and in the midst of this lecture, the boys turned the faucet over the minister's head and soaked him with cider. He was wet. And that is the conclusion of our paper today. This was a history of Calhoun Street by Mrs. Edwin Whitehead, which was read at the meeting of the town history papers of the Women's Club of Washington, Connecticut on May 2nd in 1938. And with that, we can all unmute ourselves if we'd like. I think that those who are muted have muted themselves. And I see David's hand. So if anyone has any comments or questions, we could partake in a brief discussion now.
So Calhoun Street really sort of ended before it got to the Aprils then, at that time, because you can see on the map, it only goes up to where the current road makes a sharp left up to Aprils. So I guess that wasn't considered Calhoun Street at the time.
Yeah, so I don't know if you could see my cursor that I'm moving around on the computer, but if you could see that up here, SJ Averill, it looks like at this point when this map was created in 1867, and I guess when the paper was written in 1938, that the Averills are just in the next district, which is that green boundary there. And I think that's the New Preston district. So everything that you see in pink here is the Calhoun district. And it's unusual that streets were named back then, but you could actually see on this map that it does say Calhoun Street right there. And so unfortunately, this paper just talks about the core of Calhoun Street and doesn't talk about the Averills or even the Hallecks, which are further up on present day Calhoun Street. So any other comments or questions about what you heard? So these town history papers are loaded with genealogical information, but there are great tidbits about Washington history intermixed in there too, which you heard some today. And I am not seeing everyone. So if anyone has their hand up, oh, there, Natalie has her hand up. Oops, okay. Natalie, can you hear me? Oops, hold on. I think, do I need to unmute you? I need to unmute you. Okay, wait, Natalie, you were muted. I've unmuted you. Could you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. One correction, it's Alice Keator.
Keator.
Keator, not Keator.
Okay, thank you. I'm really bad with pronunciations.
No, but it's spelled, I mean, how would you know it's spelled that way?
Now, did you know her?
No, but I didn't. I didn't know her. I might have met her once, but she was quite old when we bought our house. But anyway, two other things. How does this different from the Fran Landon printed something from, I think it was written by Mildred Calhoun, of the history of Calhoun, the history of the Calhouns, which is a little more extensive, and she got it from the museum, and I have copies of it.
Oh, you do? I don't know if I have ever seen that one, and I
Oh, well,
we had on Calhoun Street for this, and I didn't see that. Could I get a copy of it?
You sure can. I'll make extra. And that's a little more involved. And also it mentions the house I'm on Buffum Road, which became Calhoun Street North at some point and went all the way down to what is 202,
Right.
that are ending by the sawmill, but it mentions that and that.
Right, and on this map, is your house the one indicated by W.W. Wright? I think
Yes.
that's your place.
Oh, I guess it is, yes. Yeah.
Do you know anything about the Wrights who lived in your house?
No.
And at one point, the Calhouns lived in your house too, as well, right?
Right, it was built by the son, it was the last Calhoun Street, last Calhoun house to be built. I think it was 1850 something. But one interesting thing is my youngest daughter, who lives in Vermont, married Bill Hemingway, whose mother was a Calhoun and descended from John Calhoun. So he doesn't seem to be terribly interested. I don't know. I made such a big deal of this, and he maybe he was too young at the time, but anyway, so Dr. John was his whatever, great whatever, and so that was interesting. That he's related to people who built this house. Oh, and then it doesn't mention the house the Mills live in, the converted barn.
Right. So that I think I had read. We have a little report that the Historic District Commission had put together. I guess that was the barn of that Abel and Burr Calhoun, who had I guess lived in the Markert's house, which I believe is that one right on the map.
Right, but or it might have been the Shearer house because it's right next to the Shearer.
Yeah, I know. That's what, it didn't make sense to me that the barn would be so far away. So it looks like Shearer was in the oldest house currently on Calhoun Street, which is white now. That nice little, I guess it's a little salt box or Cape Cod
Right.
style house.
Yeah, the Landons used to live in it.
Yeah. Did you know the Shearers?
No, but I think they were here when my parents moved here, but I didn't know them.
I was wondering if Shearer Road was named after them.
No, I'm not sure it was. I don't know. But in the other, it mentions in the history that I'll give you that he practically, whoever built the house, the Calhoun who did the house, did the barn, it practically killed him. It's huge, absolutely huge.
Okay.
Anyway.
The reason the barn isn't on that picture is it came
Oh,
along
you gotta
in
wave your
18.
hand.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
there-
hey,
oh,
Phyllis.
hello. Hi. How are you doing? Yep. I see your hand. Go for it.
Hi, Mary.
Hi.
Hi. Hi.
The barn came along, I believe, in 1874, which was after this map was done, isn't it?
Oh, okay. So it postdates this map.
That's right.
But
But they did put a
1874 is
barn
pretty old too.
I'll have to pull out my 1873 map and see what's on that.
Take a look. Maybe this place was under construction at the time.
Right. And it was very interesting to me too. I'll have to look at the 1854 map. That's the earliest that we have of Washington. This paper talks about some houses that are no longer there. It sounded like right across from Mrs. Keator's, right?
Right.
That field there, it sounded like maybe that's where one of the first houses was constructed, and there was a school around that intersection at one point, and a blacksmith shop, and
Yeah.
then it sounded like there were some other houses across from Abel and Burr Calhoun's house further up where the Markerts live, which I think is just field now. So,
Well, Stephen, the schoolhouse is actually on this map further down.
right. Yep. So on this map, the schoolhouse was right there. You could see, if you could see my cursor, David, do you see my cursor there moving?
Yeah.
It says school number. I can't read the number, but that's where the schoolhouse was. And I think that I heard that the house, the home that is there today on the corner of Calhoun and what is this, Churchill? I think parts of that house are the remains of that school, is what I was told by someone. So yeah, I see Mary. How you doing, Mary?
Hi, how are you, Stephen? Hi, everybody. Oh, I'm
Hi,
homesick. I'm isolated down here in Savannah.
Oh, how's the weather?
Well, we've had an interesting time with tornado threat.
Oh,
Fortunately, it was just a lot of rain this time. Last week, we were in our cubby holes because it looked pretty serious. But anyway, just a lot of rain. But otherwise, quite nice, I hate to tell you.
that's good. Nice to see you.
Yeah, but I wondered if I caught it correctly. David Calhoun, in the beginning, was he the person that started Calhoun Street, and was his brother John C. Calhoun?
Yeah, so it sounded like there were three, let me just take a look back here. There were three Calhouns who came to America. It says David Calhoun came in 1732 and bought a large tract of land. And that David was born in Scotland in 1690. And then it said that his two brothers also came, James and John. James settled in, or they settled in Stratford in Connecticut in 1714. And the brother James of those three later went to Maryland, and the brother John of those three settled in South Carolina. And it was his grandson, this paper says, who became John C. Calhoun, the politician, the vice president.
Yes, because I think John C. Calhoun, the one that we're more familiar with, went to law school in Litchfield.
Right.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He went to law school in Litchfield.
Yeah, and by circumstance, being from Savannah, I am close to a Calhoun family here, and the father of my friend, the resemblance is extraordinary. The prominent brow, the enormous cranium, continued on. It's amazing how it did. But anyway, so I'm going to tell my friend.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, so I don't know if many people realize that we have national political connections here in Washington,
Right.
through the Calhoun family.
Yeah.
To, the Vice President of the United States.
Yeah, how about that?
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Great. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments that they'd like to add to this? Do I see any hands?
I see Slade.
Oh,
Hey, Mary, when did
Hi,
yours
Slade.
make it onto the scene?
oh, say that again?
When did Mary's house come into existence? It's in an open place up there between Natalie's and the northern Calhoun house.
I think it was about 1965 or 6, wasn't it, Natalie?
Is that
It
new?
was, am I muted or am I on?
You're on. I can
You're
hear
on.
you.
Now the Babcock, when we bought from Honor Brown, Mrs. Brown, they carved off a couple of acres on the south side to pay the lawyer fees, which couldn't have been too much because the house wasn't much. And anyway, sold to a family called the Babcocks. And that was, I think around 65.
Mm-hmm. Really? Not recently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have any other people that live on Calhoun Street that are listening today that would like to add any comments about what they heard, or maybe you remember some of the families that were mentioned in the paper? The Jones family was pretty prominent in town, and Val Matern, everyone remembers, remembers Val Matern. So she was a Jones. And I guess they had come up from, I think, Bronxville, New York, in maybe the 20s or the 30s. And the Hickox house here, which we saw on the left at the beginning of Calhoun Street, I guess was the Jones farm. And that's sort of where Val lived with her family during the summer. And then I guess she built a house nearby, or she moved into a house nearby.
Right.
And so that's part of the beginning here. And I found it interesting. I didn't know that the Hickoxes operated a distillery. I don't know if David is still with us, but David, did you?
No, I haven't heard. I didn't hear. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, and I was wondering if that was in Washington, because I had never heard that before.
Well, I think they were. I don't know. They were. I know the Hickox were involved with suffrage. I think this is the same family who's involved with the suffrage effort. But late Elmer Calhoun, his family was on 202. And there's a great picture of his father with his, the late Elmer Calhoun's grandfather's family with a pet crow he had that may be in the collection of the museum. And it was taken right on 202 because the Calhoun house and farm was, before Rapid Hill Road And they owned a lot of land up in that area. And I think if you look at this 1867 map, north of here, there are Calhouns up that way also.
Yeah, so I find it pretty incredible that there are still Calhouns here living in Washington. If we put the family tree up, it would probably fill an entire wall. But they're still here. And I looked into our museum catalog, and there have to be about 50 Calhouns listed in there. So they were prolific, and they're still around. Any other comments or questions from anything that you heard today? Any hands up? I don't see any other hands up right now.
Stephen, you know, this week is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day.
Okay.
And I think I might have sent you a news clipping about that in my research at newspapers.com, and I'll have to see if I can find, I think there was an article on Earth Day celebration here in Washington. I'll have to see if I have it, and I can send it to you.
Great. Yeah, that's a big anniversary, and we know that Washington did participate in that, because for our research for the new long-term exhibit that we have, I know that we have that on our timeline. I think all the schools got together, and the Gunnery and Wickham Rise, and they all went out and participated in the first Earth Day. So that was 50 years ago. Another thing in the paper that caught my interest was this, they mentioned that there was a wolf den located along the Chappaqua River, and the wolves would attack the, it was either the Bryan sheep or the Hickox's sheep. So this would have been somewhere down on the right side of this map along the Chappaqua River, somewhere from, I guess, you know, the Depot, Washington Supply area, all the way up to maybe the parking lot for Hidden Valley. Has anyone ever hiked in there? Are there any big rock outcroppings or any wolf's den that you've ever heard of? Or I wonder where
I thought it was on the other side of the river between Chapel and Beebrook, the way the paper was describing it. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was on the Hidden Valley side.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's on the western side of the Chappaqua River, maybe around the Chapel Brook or Bee Brook. Yeah, I'd be curious to know if there's some huge outrock cropping where wolves were living in Washington. So they're long since extinct, and there's no panthers anymore. I'm assuming that was maybe a mountain lion that they said that they had seen in this paper. But that was a memory from back in the 1800s.
We have a little nature note here on South Street. There's a little cottage on the property that originally was used by a chauffeur of the family that originally lived on this property in the summer. And there is some fox pups underneath the little porch of this little prefab cottage.
Wow.
And the mother visits periodically. So we're getting, speaking of nature, we're getting little nature sightings of the pups coming out from underneath this little porch every now and then.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Perfect for spring.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments about what you may have heard today in this paper? I forgot to mention that, you know, Calhoun Street is one of Washington's historic districts. And I believe the Calhoun Street Historic District was established in the 1990s. And it was created because it's one of the best preserved rural landscapes in Washington. And you could see that if you go for a walk or a bike ride or even a drive down this part of town. It's really historic and very picturesque, and we're very lucky to have it so well preserved with all these beautiful old homes and old stone walls and open fields.
That's the Ives Historic District, right?
Yeah, I think it's called Calhoun Ives Historic District. So thank you to everyone who lives in that district and for everything that you do to maintain the great history over there.
Thank you, Stephen.
Oh, you're
This was
welcome.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Final
I'm
comments?
homesick.
Okay.
Thank you.
Gotta come back, Mary.
I've got to come back. I know.
Oh God. Well, I hope you all feel
you.
well and stay safe. And we're going to try and do these every other week. So that link that you used to
Oh,
connect,
great.
here, we'll send it out again. But in 2 weeks on it looks like Monday, May 4th at 10 o'clock, we'll be hearing about the Sister Susie Society. And that was written by Dorothy Abbott Loomis in 1930. And this talks about the World War I era in Washington. So we'll hear all about what the town was doing to work together during World War I. Thank you all for joining us, and stay safe and stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Stephen.
Good to see everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
How does it stop? I don't know.
Problem.
Yeah, I guess you just hang up. Right?
Stephen has to log us out, I think.
Yeah. How do I do that?
Leave, what says leave?
Oh, I see Stephen's head
Oh, you can leave.
with Main Street.
Okay. End meeting. Goodbye.
Okay, bye.